Hey Lions, Bill Watkins here at the picnic in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And I'm sitting here with one of the smartest business guys I know, Chris Hessler.
Greetings, Lions.
Linkwell Health. Chris is the founder.
I was the first angel, and I'm now the CEO.
And the CEO. So here's what we're talking about today. Chris and I get to work together at a local nonprofit called Silicon Coular. And we began talking, about a year and a half ago, about A players. In general, an A player is the top 10% of talent in your compensation range, in your geography, if that's applicable, and they will perform the job to the expectations that you've set. And there's C players, that's 65% of the potential talent. There's B players, that's another 25%, and then 10% are A players. So Chris and I started talking about A players because we needed to look for a new executive director of our nonprofit. And then Chris, you went through a recruiting and hiring process for Linkwell.
Yep.
So let's talk about in your words, the difference in your observations of B and C player talent and A player talent.
Well, I will bring it back to the Silicon Coular experience. We had an executive director. She was pretty good. And she gave us her notice. And I was bummed out for about 5 minutes. And then I said, what a great opportunity to get an A player. And we now have an A player running Silicon Coular. And I'm sure anybody who's hired people has hired C players and hired A players. And the A players just make your life so much different, better, and easier. And one of my observations, Bill, about A players is that they're always ahead of you. And that is the simple test that I've developed over time around A players and leadership. Who's ahead of whom? If you are always telling a direct report what they need to do or how they need to do it, they're not an A player. The A players are always coming to you and pushing you. And that's the simple difference in my experience.
So how does that work, though, for the leaders out in the audience who maybe are a little intimidated by that?
Can't be intimidated by it. The way your organization is going to grow into a world-class organization is by surrounding yourself with A players who are better than you at what they're hired to do, and they're going to push you and make you better, and they're going to raise everybody's game in the process.
So I totally agree with that. So in essence, Lions, if you're the leader who is intimidated by, I'm looking at the snow in the trees. Hey guys, crazy, right? 7,000 feet and there's already snow up there.
In the trees.
So if you're a leader who's intimidated by A player talent, then that's a deficiency on your side that you've got to work on.
Yeah, and here's your fate. If you're intimidated by A player talent, you're going to hire B player talent, and the B players are going to hire C player talent, and your organization's not going to be world class. It'll only be world class if you hire A players and surround yourself with A players who then hire A players.
Totally, because it then builds on each other. MVPs on professional baseball, football, basketball, any team, they don't want to be the best player on the team because they're never going to win a championship that way. They want to either have players that are better than them or they want to have players equal to them. LeBron James did not move back and forth across teams just so he could be the best guy on the team. He said, if I come, those four come with me. And they created a championship team.
Well, and to continue with the hoops analogy, the thing Michael Jordan was always known for was making everybody else around him better. Like, he knew that he couldn't win by himself. he needed the other 4 guys out there, and he pushed them really hard.
Totally.
And so did Kobe.
Yep.
Kobe pushed them really hard.
Totally.
Right?
So what you need to know is, first, your life right now, if you, Chris and I have both hired C talent and B player talent until we got really, really good at finding talent, hiring talent, and then developing talent. But for the longest time, here's what happens, and it happened to us too. We ended up working way too hard, and our organization got way less results than it should have been. Why? Because we couldn't bring talent onto the team. And so it's no different than, trying to play NFL football with a Pop Warner level players. So you saw it happen in Silicon Coular,
yep.
and you're seeing it happen right now in Linkwell, right? So you've just hit profitability, cash flow positive profitability, and you've got an A player there who came into a sales role, and they're going to sign a contract soon, right?
Yeah, they're going to sign a contract after 30, 45 days.
Yep.
And that's what let me give you a little context here. So about 6 months ago, I asked Bill and Rusty Lyon to help us really put together an A-player hiring toolkit for individual contributors in B2B sales. And we went through that exercise, and 2 things happened. One thing that was a really pleasant side surprise is that the team started talking about A players.
It became a cultural language that you began using.
Correct. And it's now in the board meeting deck. It's in the investor update. We're talking about hiring A players in sales. The second thing that happened is we put together a really rigorous process, and we ended up with an A player. And those of you who have built or run sales organizations, it doesn't take long to know what you have after you hire a salesperson. You know within 30 or 60 days what you have, because just by their actions, because they either are ahead of you or they're not ahead of you. And this gal we hired is constantly ahead of us, total A player, has been successful in every role in sales, and I can just feel it's a palpable difference on the weekly sales calls. She actually took over the weekly sales calls. She said, "I don't like the way you're doing it." I said, "Great, do it better." And she completely reimagined it, and they're now 10 times better than what I was doing. But that's an A player. Mm-hmm. They're ahead of you.
I love it.
I'm not asking her to do this; she's just doing it.
Yeah, she took initiative. So this is the what you see on the exterior of an A player. Let's talk for a second though about the process that you went through to find this A player. I think what we experienced as a board when we were looking for our new ED, and we went through the A player process, and then what you experienced with Linkwell was a very step-by-step formalized process that maybe in the beginning seemed a little rigorous, seemed a little structured, and maybe seemed intimidating to who you were hiring. So I want you to talk about the feeling of the process on being a part of it, and then I would love you to as you engaged with these candidates who were the A players, whether the process turned them away, what was their impression of the process?
Okay, so there's a couple questions in there, Bill, so let me parse it out a bit. First, on building the process, the thing about hiring A players is you have to be very intentional. You don't find A players by accident. I mean, maybe every now and then you might, but it's unlikely. That's
blind pig finds a nut.
Every now and then, just by digging around,
right?
But you have to be intentional, and you have to really take the time to understand what is it you're looking for. What is that scorecard? What are the attributes and the behaviors against which you're going to score that individual in the interview and the interviews. So that's number one.
Yep.
Right? And what I will say is Rusty Lyon has an excellent process to do that. And it's worth it's worth whatever money you spend to get the process right, because the data shows that if you make a mishire, it costs something like 10 times the base salary to recover, right?
$100,000 executive manager
it's
and
$1 million
it's $1 million
mistake, right?
Yeah.
Think about a
Direct and
$200,000 person, a couple $1 million mistake, right? And so whatever you're going to spend to get help, spend it and get it right, and take the time to get it right. And then what I learned about the process was a couple things. First of all, A players aren't out there looking for jobs. A players have jobs because they're A players. And in sales, they're making lots of money because they're A players.
Yeah.
Okay? So the second thing is A players want to be in A environments with other A players.
Totally.
Okay? So if you show up with a rigorous process, you shouldn't make apologies for it. You should say, this is our process because this is how we find A players. And the A players will respond positively to the process because they'll respect the fact that you're looking for A players.
Got it. So I want to rewind just for a second. You talked about the job scorecard where you're defining, the job purpose and their contribution and the salary level and what the skills that you're looking for and all that. And I remember you going through this both from the ED level and then and that Linkwell sales position. But one thing you talked about was behaviors. So give the Lions out there an idea. When you say behaviors, and when you look for A players and you use an A player hiring process, it's definitely a behavioral based interview process. It's skill based, but you're looking for those behaviors that will occur, that naturally occur in this particular person. But give the audience an idea of the behaviors, for example, that you were looking for when you were hiring your sales professional.
Okay. Those of us who've worked in sales and built sales organizations know that there are things that you do in sales that work. They've been proven over time. So let me give a very clear example between a C player and an A player. So I had a C player on the team who left the company, and that C player then turned over the dormant accounts, the dormant opportunities, to the new A player. Okay? The first thing the A player did, because she's smart, she said, I'm going to go where there's already some traction. Okay. Rather than starting over, I'm going to look at these dormant accounts because somebody's talked to them, they had an interest, never went anywhere. Okay. So what did she do? She looked through the files, she looked through the emails, and the first thing she realized was her predecessor was doing nothing but emailing these people, and they weren't responding. So what did she do? She picked up the phone and called them at 7:45 in the morning and got them both on the phone and got them both agree to meet with us, okay, which the predecessor hadn't been able to do for 90, 120 days, right? And I asked her, I said, I knew it was the right thing, but I wanted to know why she did it. And she said, well, I've just learned that people show up at 7:45 in the morning. They usually don't have off meetings at 7:45, and they usually answer their phone. She says, it's worked in every job I've had. Now, that's a behavior that it's learned. It's a learned behavior, but she's mastered it. And it moved the ball forward.
Totally.
In the first week.
Yeah. And I remember when we were talking about your particular hire, you defined it like this. That behavior right there came under the category of, I believe, hunter-farmer. You did not want, what you had was an executive who was willing to plant some seeds and then throw the fertilizer on it and then sit back and wait for the relationship to grow. Yes. What you got was a hunter who said, I'm not sitting here waiting. At 7:45, I'm calling, meaning I know where the big game is and I need to go get it. Does that?
Totally.
Totally?
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
It's the hunter behavior we were looking for, Bill, is the every single day waking up and saying, what am I going to do to move this specific account opportunity ahead today?
Yeah.
Right? But it's not it's not we sit down with the person and talk about it. Like the person just does it because they know that that's what's required.
So, Lyons, what we're talking about here are the behaviors that you define on the job scorecard. You go through. We do it in a 2-hour workshop, but you can do it yourself. But using this front and back job scorecard, you'll define the skills, you'll define the expertise and experiences that you want from this team player. I know Alec, you've done this. Alec, one of the guys on the watching us right now, he's hired several A players in his organization. So then what you define are those behaviors. I remember, so one of them was Chris was looking for a hunter farmer. Alpine was looking for a growth mindset. Carol Dweck's growth mindset, not a fixed mindset, but a growth mindset. I remember when we were looking for the ED. So there's two types of competencies, behavioral competencies. There's job related, and then there's company related. I'll give you an example of a company related. Remember we were defining the company related behavioral competencies for our executive director, and it was our executive director was comfortable around billionaires and the board, whereby they could go to Pinky G's, which is a local pizzeria, and grab a pizza and a beer and sit around the table with billionaires and the board and not be intimidated.
Yep.
And so this was, we did not want an ED, for example, who's going to be all uptight, because there's a lot of billionaires out here and millionaires, and obviously our ED won't be. And so we wanted our ED to be able to have fun and relax. And so Chris did that. We did that together when we defined the ED. We did that together with Chris when you were working on your sales professional. Here's another thing I wanted to talk about is there's a thing we do with A players. Now it happens in pro sports, so if you forget what I'm talking about now, you can easily re-trigger it just by looking at how sports teams build their franchise. Is that we call it build the bench. And basically what you're doing is you're going to reach out to an A player maybe, and that A player is going to have their head down because they're amidst a really exciting project. They're not looking for a job like what you said, and they go to you, man, it sounds really great, but not for me, not right now. Your answer is, well, I might have something for you in the future. Would it be okay if we stayed in touch? And an A player is going to go, because you're an A player organization, an A player is going to go, absolutely. And so every now and then, maybe once or twice a year, you stay in touch with your A players. How's your career going? Look at what's happened over at my company, and then maybe you come together. Chris, you had an experience whereby this A player that you've hired had previous experience with Marianne, right? And so this is exactly what building the bench is. Marianne now had the job scorecard, and she reached out to proven players, and she said, is now the time? Because I've got a great opportunity.
Yep.
And instead of pulling an unknown into your organization, you mentioned twice that you're actually doing this again. You're reaching out into a proven network of Marianne's experiences, and you're going to pull in another A player.
I think the other way to think about it, Bill, is to think about it as perpetual recruiting.
Exactly.
As a leader of an organization, your number one job is to recruit talent.
Totally.
Okay? And so you are perpetually recruiting a talent. And it doesn't mean you have an opening and you have a spec and you have a scorecard and you're looking for somebody who looks like this. It means if you spot a talent, you put them on your bench. You're recruiting. You're always recruiting. Yeah. And you're trying to figure out where they fit.
Yep. And you're on the board of an organization that does that. They're constantly looking for opportunity.
Yep.
And then they're constantly looking for talent to put into those opportunities. And sometimes those coincide, but sometimes they'll bring on talent before they even have the opportunity. And that's exactly what you're doing. You leaders out there, that is exactly right, Chris. One of the things that you're doing is you are constantly building your team, motivating your team, and you're constantly recruiting.
Yeah, and I think the other point I would just make is that I have this very simple philosophy, Bill. Whether it's a nonprofit or for-profit, the organizations that win, they just amass the most talent. They amass the most talent.
The movie Moneyball.
It's Moneyball.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yep.
I mean, you want the guy with the on-base percentage.
Totally.
Right?
And
who's batting third.
And statistics would show that if he has a 2% on-base average, he's 2% better than other players, and you put him in that position, your organization, you get 2%ers all across every position, and your organization is exponentially going to get better. One more thing, and then I know Chris has got to get over, hang out with his daughter. You said, I think something like, maybe it was in your investor update or whatever, but you said we've brought on the A talent and we're pre-boarding her, or you put her through some sort of formal process. Was that right?
Correct. So here's what we did. We needed her to have instant impact, okay? And she had constraints around when she could leave her prior employment due to compensation. She had a bonus coming,
right?
Okay? So for a month before she started, rather than onboarding her, we pre-boarded her.
So that day one.
Yeah, and what we did was we did 2 weeks of basic training, like here's the product, the proposition. She understood the market, she understood the customers, but our product and proposition was slightly different than what she'd sold before. We did that for 2 weeks, and then for the last 2 weeks, we actually talked about real opportunities that she would go pursue, and we trained her on how to think about the opportunities so that when she started, she had real context.
Yeah.
And that's a reason why she's going to close this piece of business in 6 weeks after starting, which is unusual. You don't usually take salespeople 3 to 6 months.
Easily.
But you can affect that startup curve.
Totally.
And the pre-boarding was a way to do it.
So the takeaway there is, there's the recruiting part, there's the preparation part. So this is the job scorecard, the behavioral competency workshop, getting your interview team together, establishing the fixed process, and it's actually, and I know this is going to, I don't know if it's going to scare you, but you're going to go, what? It's 16 steps.
It's a bunch of work.
It's 16 steps, 4 interviews. Totally worth it. Totally makes sense. But once you sign that contract with that A player, you leaders are not done. Because now you have to do what Chris did. You don't just say, hey, here's your desk, here's the phone, here are your business cards, go for it. You have to move them into an onboarding, a formal onboarding process. You're honoring the talent that you have sitting in front of you, but you're making sure that talent is profitable for you as quickly as possible. Chris couldn't do an onboarding process because she couldn't join his organization. He did a pre-boarding process, so on day one,
she was already onboarded.
She was making calls.
And in fact, the week before she joined, we did all the paperwork. We did all the insurance. We got her a computer. Like, we didn't spend the first week doing that. We actually did that before she joined.
Ahead of time. And so these are the things that you do so that when your A player talent comes on, you never want, this is what I always tell anybody, a candidate that I'm hiring, I want to make absolutely sure that through this process that the only surprises you have in joining our organization and the only surprise I have about you is I go, wow. If I had known that, we would have brought that person on even faster. Or if I'd known that about that organization, I wish I'd joined them 2 years ago. And so what you need to do is you need to make sure that you're not surprising them with this harsh, well, here's a customer list, go for it. You're moving them through your formal onboarding process. And then I'm sure you're doing this, but you're going to set up formal reviews, especially in that early onboarding process where they're asking freely questions, you're giving performance reviews.
Yeah, I think the sum of this all, Bill, is you want to break down the process into the key steps, and then you want to be intentional every step along the way.
Totally.
You don't want to be accidental.
Yeah, Moneyball, if you saw that movie, Brad Pitt, you see that he was very methodical, about building his team, and everyone laughed at him because they said, "Nah, you just kind of do like this, talent scouts. I know him when I see him."
School scouts.
The old school scouts, and the old school hiring is going to get you doing what you hate to do, doing too much of it, and not getting the performance out of your organization that you want. So that's it for A-player hiring today. If you're interested in that, give me a comment, ask me a question. I'll get you some documents out about how you can implement an A-player hiring process in your own company.
Well, and the last thought I'll leave all the CEOs with, all the Lions with, is that Rusty Lion does have a toolkit. Like they have broken down the steps into a process. And it is worth engaging on that process, because then you don't have to go recreate it. You just have to go implement it.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We've had this process for years. Robert and I hired. We had an internal process, and then we turned it external to our coaching clients over the last 3 years. And then when we were looking for our ED, I threw it out to Chris. I said, well, I've never done this for anybody who's outside the Rusty Lion organization as a coaching client, but would you be interested in learning about, maybe using this when we looked for our ED? We used the Rusty Lion A-player hiring toolkit process, and then Chris, he was our first ever customer for that process. And I'm not necessarily here advertising for it. It's available to you if you want it. Happy to talk to you about it. Thanks a lot for listening on your Saturday afternoon. Thanks to my awesome, really smart,
always a pleasure,
business guy here who I love to hang out with. And we're going to get on with the rest.
Good luck to the Lions hiring A players. Don't hire anything but A players.
Yep. Know it when you see it. It's just like seeing a lion out in the savannah. It's not a warthog. And so you need to know what A players are. You need to figure out how to recruit them and hire them, and then motivate them and lead them. You can do it. Get out there and roar. Have a great weekend.